Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep, really deep into the brain's central regulator, the diencephalon.
It's a fantastic topic.
It is. It's derived from the prosencephalon, so the forebrain. And this relatively small region acts as a totally indispensable bridge.
It really does. It takes all those raw signals coming up from the brainstem and the spinal cord, and maybe most critically, it processes and directs them before the cerebral cortex even knows what's happening.
Exactly. So if you're trying to get your bearings mentally.
Yeah, you should imagine the diencephalon as this dense, critical mass of tissue that's surrounding the third ventricle, deep in the very center of your head. It's small, sure, but it's functional roles. I mean, everything from keeping you awake to controlling your stress response and hormone levels. It's just monumental.
And we can break this area down into four major parts, really just based on their location running from top to bottom.
That's right. Structurally, you've got the epithalamus superiorly, which includes the pineal gland. Then there's the huge ovoid mass that just dominates the whole region.
Yeah.
The thalamus.
And then tucked right below that
Are the essential visceral control centers, so the hypothalamus and the subthalamus. And our mission today is really to just verbally map this complex central territory so you can walk away with a crystal clear idea of its structure, its function, and why it really is the undisputed master coordinator of the entire forebrain.
Let's start with the largest component then, the thalamus. Our sources describe it as a large, ovoid, nuclear mass, maybe 4 centimeters long. And frankly, if you want to understand consciousness, sleep, attention, even movement, you just have to understand the thalamus.
Absolutely. It earns that title of chief relay and regulatory center. Now, to help you visualize it without a picture, just picture a large egg, an oval. Its back end, the posterior end, expands out dramatically into a region called the pulvinar.
The pulvinar.
Yeah, and this pulvinar is so large, it actually overhangs the superior colliculus of the midbrain.
Yeah.
And that's important because that posterior expansion is involved in, high-level association and visual processing.
So it's a massive central hub. But what keeps it all organized inside? I mean, the sheer volume of information passing through must be just staggering.
The organization is the entire key.
Yeah.
Internally, the dorsal thalamus isn't just one solid uniform block. It's all compartmentalized.
Okay.
There's this vertical Y-shaped sheet of white matter called the internal medullary lamina. And this structure, it basically acts like an anatomical blueprint. It divides the entire mass into 3 main groups of nuclei.
The anterior, medial, and lateral ones.
Exactly.
And functionally, our sources really stress that we need to understand 2 key types of nuclei here, right? Not all of them are doing the same job.
Precisely. We distinguish between relay or first-order nuclei and association or high-order nuclei. Their lead nuclei are your simple, direct messengers. They get a specific driver input, like a sensory signal or a motor command, and they shoot that precise information right up to a specific cortical area. They're the essential communication channels.
And the association nuclei.
They're the integrators. They don't get those primary inputs. Instead, they handle these really complex integrative functions. They participate in these intricate back and forth loops between different parts of the cortex.
Nice.
They allow the thalamus to modulate thought and attention and planning. They make sure all these complex cortical activities are synchronized. The thalamus is, at the end of the day, the gatekeeper that determines what information even reaches our conscious awareness.
That gatekeeper role, that also makes it a prime target for therapeutic intervention, right?
Yeah.
In the real world, we're talking about deep brain stimulation, DBS.
The clinical link is immediate. It's so powerful. For instance, in severe movement disorders like essential tremor, surgeons don't have to target the cortex.
Right.
They target a very specific relay nucleus inside the thalamus, the ventral intermediate nucleus, or VIM. By stimulating the VIM, they can just dramatically suppress the tremor. It just shows you the thalamus's power over motor output. And similarly, stimulating the anterior thalamus is now a therapeutic target for intractable epilepsy, which really highlights its role in regulating, generalized brain activity and consciousness itself.
Okay, let's use that Y-shaped lamina as our map then and tour these 3 major divisions. And let's focus on the story of the signals passing through. So starting with the anterior thalamic nuclei, nestled right in the arms of that Y shape.
The anterior nuclei are all about memory and the limbic system. Think of them as essential relay points for alertness and for your attention circuits. And what's fascinating here is their input. They get their signals through the mammillothalamic tract.
Okay, hold on. Can you unpack the mammillothalamic tract? That sounds impossibly technical for an audio deep dive.
Sure, absolutely. Just think of this tract as a private high-speed rail line. It connects your memory center, so the hippocampal formation, via those little knots called the mammillary bodies, directly to the thalamus.
Okay, a direct line.
A direct line. This makes the anterior nuclei crucial for retrieving and processing new memories. So any damage to this area, it just severely impacts your memory circuits.
Moving inward then to the medial thalamic nuclei. This one is dominated by the mediodorsal nucleus, and this is where our higher association functions really kick in.
The mediodorsal nucleus is a massive association hub. It's especially large in humans, and it connects reciprocally and very powerfully with the prefrontal cortex.
Which is responsible for personality, judgment.
All of that, and also the amygdala for emotion. This connection is so fundamental to high-level cognition that when this nucleus is damaged, the behavioral effects can look remarkably similar to the personality changes we used to see with a prefrontal lobotomy.
That's incredible.
Yeah, people can experience profound confusion, especially about the passage of time.
That really underscores its role in just integrating our whole sense of reality. Okay, now let's tackle the biggest group, the lateral thalamic nuclei, which handle both motor and somatic sensation.
This is the workhorse division. It's split into ventral and dorsal tiers, but let's focus on the ventral tier. That's where the key relays live. For motor control, you have the ventral anterior, or VA, and the ventral lateral, or VL.
But why the split? Why VA and VL, and why does the VL itself have two distinct parts? That seems, I don't know, overly complicated just for relaying motor commands.
It's complicated because your motor system has two major control centers, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum.
Right.
And they handle different aspects of movement planning versus execution, basically. And the thalamus keeps those two distinct pathways segregated.
Ah, I see.
So the anterior part of the VL nucleus, that gets input from the globus pallidus. It's part of the basal ganglia loop. It projects to the motor cortex for planning. But the posterior part of the VL gets its input from the cerebellum. It's part of the cerebellar loop, and it projects to the primary motor cortex for smooth, coordinated execution of the movement. The thalamus has to keep those two loops separate.
Okay, that makes sense. And right next to the motor centers, we hit the sensory center, the ventral posterior nucleus, the VP.
The VP nucleus is the absolute principal relay for conscious somatic sensation.
Yeah.
And like the motor part, it's subdivided. The ventral posterolateral nucleus, or VPL, handles sensory information from your body touch, pain, temperature.
And the other part?
But next door, the ventral posteromedial nucleus, or VPM, handles all the sensory information from the face and taste, from the trigeminothalamic pathway.
You mentioned before that the sensory mapping here is incredibly precise. How can we visualize that body map?
It is an engineering marvel. It's called somatotopy. Imagine the entire other half of your body laid out, not flat, but in a series of curved layers of neurons, like a stack of curved onion slices.
Okay.
The sensory input from your sacral segments is represented most laterally. As you move medially through the nucleus, you hit lumbar, thoracic, and finally the cervical segments. And they just smoothly about the face representation in the VPM. So localized injury there causes a very specific localized sensory loss on the opposite side of the body.
And beyond general body sensation, we have the specialized sensory relays for sound and sight.
Yes, they're geniculate bodies. They're tucked posteriorly near the pulvinar. The medial geniculate nucleus, or MGB, is the auditory relay. It gets signals from the inferior colliculus, and it contains a complete tonotopic map of sound frequency.
Tonotopic.
Yeah, so low-pitched sounds are represented laterally, and high-pitched sounds are mapped medially. It's literally an internal piano keyboard.
And its visual counterpart, the lateral geniculate nucleus, the LGB.
The LGB is where your optic nerve information goes. It's a small ovoid structure, and it's famous for its organization into 6 distinct layers, 1 to 6, from inner to outer. It precisely organizes visual space before sending signals on.
So for any single point in my visual field.
Exactly. The LGB gets input from both your eyes, but it keeps them segregated by layer. The contralateral eye's input goes to layers 1, 4, and 6. The ipsilateral, or same-side eye, its input goes to layers 2, 3, and 5. This lamination is essential for maintaining a precise map of the entire contralateral visual field.
Wow. And finally, before we leave the thalamus, we have the intralaminar nuclei. They're embedded within that Y sheet. What do they do?
They're important for regulating overall cortical excitability. They're closely related to the basal ganglia system. The biggest is the centromedian nucleus. But clinically, damage to this posterior group is linked to a really powerful, distressing symptom: unilateral neglect.
Tell us more about neglect.
Unilateral neglect means a person truly ignores everything on the side opposite to their lesion. It's not that they're blind, it's a cognitive failure to even acknowledge that half of the world exists.
So they might only eat food on the right side of their plate.
Exactly, or only draw the right half of a clock face. It is a profound example of how a tiny lesion in this central integration area can just completely distort a person's perception of reality.
Okay, so if the thalamus is the great sensory and motor relay station, then the hypothalamus is the chief engineer managing the body's internal systems. This structure is minuscule, less than 0.5% of total brain volume, but it is the master integrator for every single element of homeostasis.
Its small size is so deceptive. Geographically, if you just slide right under the thalamus, you hit this area. It runs from the front of the brain all the way back to these little pea-sized knots called the mammillary bodies.
And it has a very clear functional division for the autonomic nervous system, which manages all our involuntary functions.
That's right. It's remarkably consistent. The anterior hypothalamus generally promotes parasympathetic effects, the rest and digest side. Stimulate this area, and you might see vasodilation, sweating, decreased heart rate. It's all about heat loss.
And the posterior part does the opposite.
Precisely. The posterior hypothalamus governs sympathetic arousal, the fight-or-flight side. It promotes shivering, vasoconstriction, heat production. This one structure literally manages whether you are boiling over or freezing.
And this control goes right into metabolic regulation, famously with the ventromedial nucleus.
Correct. The ventromedial nucleus acts as the satiety center.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you when you've had enough to eat. If this nucleus gets damaged, maybe during surgery for something nearby, it can cause a profound clinical issue.
Uncontrolled eating.
Uncontrolled eating, leading to severe, rapid-onset obesity, because the body has just lost its internal off switch for food.
So let's get into the neuroendocrine control. How does the hypothalamus manage hormone release, starting with those big hormone-producing cells, the magnocellular neurons?
The magnocellular neurons are large cells in the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei. They're synthesis powerhouses. They produce vasopressin, that's the antidiuretic hormone, for osmotic balance, and oxytocin.
Okay.
And their axons form a direct physical pathway, the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract, that runs straight down the pituitary stalk and ends in the neural hypophysis, or posterior pituitary. The hormones are stored there and released directly into the bloodstream.
And a defect in that production causes a specific disease, right?
Yes. If you can't produce vasopressin, or if that tract is damaged, the body can't retain water. It leads to massive fluid loss and thirst. The condition is called cranial diabetes insipidus.
We can't talk about central control without mentioning the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, the body's internal clock.
It really is the master circadian pacemaker. This small cluster of neurons synchronizes every internal rhythm, sleep, temperature, hormone levels to the outside world. And what's unique is that it gets direct retinal input.
From the eye.
From specialized cells in the eye that have the photopigment melanopsin. These cells specifically detect luminance, or brightness, allowing the SCN to sync up with the light-dark cycle, keeping your body's rhythm precisely on track.
Finally, we have to talk about the complex vascular connection to the adenohypophysis, the anterior pituitary. This system is bizarre because the anterior pituitary has no direct arterial supply.
That is a crucial point to understand. Instead of a direct artery, the hypothalamus uses this specialized chemical communication network. It's called the hypophyseal portal system.
A portal system?
Yes. Superior hypophyseal arteries supply a capillary bed in the median eminence. These vessels drain into long portal veins, which then carry blood containing chemical messengers down to the sinusoids of the adenohypophysis.
And what are those chemical messengers?
They are hypothalamic releasing and inhibiting hormones. They're synthesized by the smaller parvocellular neurons. The hypothalamus releases these hormones into the portal blood, and they act instantly upon the anterior pituitary cells below, controlling what they secrete. It's a genius method of chemical vascular control. It keeps this potent endocrine control mechanism totally separate from your general circulation.
Okay, we're moving to the final, smaller components of the diencephalon, starting superiorly with the epithalamus.
The epithalamus is known mainly for the habenular nuclei and the pineal gland. The habenular nuclei are an ancient part of the forebrain. They're connected to the midbrain via a tract called the fasciculus retroflexus.
And their function.
This system is linked to modulating reward and goal-directed behavior. You can think of it as part of the system that helps you decide if a reward is actually worth the effort.
And the famous pineal gland?
The pineal gland. located right between the superior colliculi, is where melatonin is synthesized. Its production rises dramatically in darkness, and this whole process is regulated by the sympathetic output that the SCN controls. Anatomically, the pineal gland is unique because it often develops these calcified deposits. They're called brain sand.
Why is brain sand worth mentioning?
It's a great clinical marker. These calcified bits are dense enough to show up on X-rays or CT scans. And since the pineal gland sits exactly on the midline of the brain, those little bits of brain sand give you a fixed, easy radiographic landmark.
Let's see if the midline has shifted.
Exactly, to assess if the midline structures have shifted because of, say, hemorrhage or swelling.
Finally, let's go inferiorly and laterally to the subthalamus. This area feels like the brain's high-speed intersection.
It is exactly that. The subthalamus contains its namesake, the subthalamic nucleus, a critical excitatory part of the basal ganglia motor loop. But functionally, it's most defined by the vast fiber tracts that just course right through it, what neurologists call the fields of Ferrel.
Which tracts are moving through that intersection?
You've got ascending sensory fibers heading toward the thalamus, but most importantly, this is where massive motor tracts from the globus pallidus, the ansa lenticularis, and the fasciculus lenticularis converge. They consolidate into the thalamic fasciculus, the H1 field of Ferrel, before they finally reach the motor nuclei of the thalamus.
And damage here is serious.
Very. Damage here, especially to the subthalamic nucleus, results in violent involuntary movements called hemiballismus, which proves its crucial role in dampening down motor signals.
What an incredible central territory. We've mapped everything from memory circuits and sensory input segregation to appetite control and your entire sleep-wake cycle, all just contained within this small, deep region.
It truly emphasizes the diencephalon's power as the brain's unseen operating system. The thalamus, by filtering and relaying virtually all information coming to the cortex, acts not just as a passive post office, but as the main driver and modulator for conscious activity.
And the hypothalamus right next to it controls all the autonomic and endocrine performance needed to support that conscious activity.
Right.
The diencephalon really proves that knowledge processing isn't just about the vast cortex. It's about the small, centrally integrated hub controlling everything from the precision of your movement to your ability to manage stress and stay alive.
Absolutely. If you take away anything today, it should be how interconnected these systems are, how tightly your memory, your movement, and your hormones are all controlled by this one central processing unit.
The fact that the entire complexity of the somatotopic map, the visual system, and the endocrine control mechanism all reside in this tiny, centrally protected location, it just speaks volumes about its evolutionary importance.
It really does.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the anatomy of the central diencephalon. We encourage you to continue exploring the function and complex connections of these nuclei on your own.